Measure What Matters drove the creation of a system called OKRs, better known as Objectives and Key Results. Today, OKRs are used by some of the largest companies in the world like Google and Amazon and Microsoft, HP. But are OKRs really the latest shiny new object that every company wants to use just to be with it? When do OKRs really succeed? And what are some of the cautionary tales that we need to keep in mind about when they don't succeed? Let's close the loop on this. Joining me on Close the Loop is Vidya Santhanam. Vidya is the co-founder of an OKR platform called Fitbots. Vidya, welcome to Close the Loop.
Thank you, Shini. Pleasure to be here.
So, OKRs, are they really the shiny new thing that every company wants to have OKRs? Is it like the new thing that everyone wants to have?
You know, interestingly, actually, OKRs is a 50-year pedigree.
Wow, really?
Yeah, and actually it borrows from best practices right from MBOs. Intel was the first company to
management by
use OKRs.
objectives, MBOs.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. I think over the last few years, there have been many companies who've actually embraced it well. Google, of course, being the most popular one.
The most popular champion of it. Yeah.
That's right. But interestingly, many people ask us, tell us about some real companies which are there around us.
Companies that we can relate to.
We can relate to, who actually have adopted OKRs, and there are definitely many of them.
Okay.
So I must say that while it is considered sometimes as a shiny new penny of mine, it's transitioning into something which can actually work in organizations.
Right.
Yeah.
So what do you think has created this wave? I mean, let's leave aside the fact that some large brands are behind it. Of course, that does help adopt new ideas. But what is it on the ground that has brought OKRs into the picture is it really like a performance management system, or is it something different from a performance management system?
So what caused the wave? I think right from 2020, COVID-19 actually changed many things.
Right.
When teams went remote, and that was also the time when companies were looking at, hey, how do we really grow, in a new, very different context from where we were. So that's where OKRs actually moved companies to managing by outcomes rather than managing by input. So that was the first big wave which happened. The second thing is, when we actually look around us, there are many things we actually do as teams. But when it comes to reviews, we're actually reviewed individually and celebrated for individual brilliance.
Correct.
So what OKRs does is, it kind of breaks that philosophy and rides on something which is a team sport. So when companies set OKRs, they're actually setting it as teams rather than individuals.
Right.
So it's a fundamental shift from
it's a goal for a team.
It's a goal for a team.
Right.
The other spectacular part about OKRs is that it's written as cross-functional teams. So you could be part of, let's say, marketing or sales or customer success or operations, but when you come together, eye on the prize is common. So there's a shared commitment, and then teams are coming together to move a shared commitment metric, which is also what makes it popular.
Right.
So these are some subtle differences that we've seen, and of course the rest is, it's a change to business and more strategic in nature.
But I also believe that there are certain principles of OKRs, right?
Yeah.
The ground rules.
Yeah.
Like whatever I have seen is that they kind of force you to have few objectives. Like you can't have 50 objectives.
Correct.
Can you just walk us through some of those guiding principles of OKRs and why they are the way they are?
Yeah. Again, going back to some of the principles is, fundamentally it's a shift from me to we. So that's the first fundamental.
Me to we, yeah.
Yeah,
right.
me to we. So
Right.
The second is input to outcomes.
Right.
So our minds are wired by tasks.
Correct.
And that's what drives our day. So for instance, let's say for marketing teams, sometimes it's the number of blogs that are written. Or let's say for sales, it's probably the number of calls which are made.
Correct.
So all those are inputs, but we're all working towards a larger outcome. So that's what it forces teams to think about. I think the third important shift, as you rightly called out, is it's more like spear fishing. It's not like casting a net, right? And it's not casting it wide.
It's a very precise.
Very precise, high precision metrics, probably at 3 objectives, not more than 5 key results.
Right.
So you're really talking about it fitting into a page.
The other area where I think a lot of teams struggle, and I'm speaking from my own experience of having gone through it a little bit, is the measurable aspect of it, right? It's sometimes there are some, like if you can't measure it, it should not be in
Correct.
it. Am I right in assuming that?
It is correct.
Okay.
But I want to add to that is what to measure is also important. So I'd like to call out an example, and this is a story of the rats of Hanoi. So in the rats of Hanoi, the story goes that in Hanoi there was a problem of rats, and the government wanted They're, people to actually catch rats and give it to them, but give them the tail.
Right.
So, people started then breeding rats, cutting the tail and giving it. So the rat
Correct.
problem was never solved.
True.
So the reason I'm sharing this analogy is that because in OKRs, if you measure the wrong metrics, then also it doesn't impact the business.
Correct.
So measuring is important, but what to measure is also equally important.
And how do you course correct? Let's say you picked a metric to measure and 2 months down the line you figured that this is not the right one. Is it okay to go back and change it?
Yeah, it is. But there's one more interesting check around this is that consider OKRs like your human body, right? Where everything is interconnected. And if you actually, let's say your one part of the body is hurting, there's an impact on something else. So it's very similar because OKRs are interconnected. So let's say you change a metric. So let's say a team changes a metric, then you may want to go and reflect on whether the company metric also needs to be changed because there's a vertical as well as a
So it has a cascading effect on other.
That's right. Either on teams which are working with you,
right,
or let's say the company.
Got it. So let's switch tracks to really looking at. You worked with a lot of companies, large and small. I'll ask you in a very straightforward way: are OKRs for everyone, for every company?
There's this analogy of the iceberg. And it's a common analogy in communication. There's an above the iceberg and there's below the iceberg. So it's very similar in OKR. So when we reach out to a company reaches out to us, there seems to be that this company is ready for OKRs. But that's where you need to go below the hood and really ask some pertinent questions.
Okay.
So for instance, who's the sponsor of OKRs?
Okay.
The sponsor of OKRs is probably the most critical element in an OKR journey. When there's a sponsor, there's a clearly called out, anybody on the leadership team who has a clear, probably connection to strategy, is a great sponsor of OKR. So that's the number one check. Who's the sponsor? The second interesting thing is that OKRs are not a project. So many times when we hear that, hey, we want to try it for 90 days. So there's no sampling here.
It's not an experiment.
It's not an experiment. So it's important to take it through. So you need a minimum 1 year commitment to see whether you can take it through. That's the second thing. So is there a commitment?
Right.
The third important thing is, is there that internal champion who actually takes this through? The champion is a very critical role.
So the champion is different from the sponsor.
The champion is different from the sponsor. The sponsor is the one who ensures that, hey, we are on to the signs of OKRs. Champion's the cause of it, but the champion is the one who's actually driving the program.
It on a day-to-day.
Yeah, that's right.
Got it.
Now the champion's role is, the champion is actually the mind and the heart of the OKR rollout.
Right.
The reason why we say that is mind because it's all about metrics, heart because it's about people. So somebody who's got a deep connection to the company as well as connection to a strategy of the company is a great champion. So these are a few reasons why companies, if they have these in place, they can sustain.
But then there's no type of company like how small, how big. Can any company actually use OKRs?
Yeah,
provided these things are in place?
Yeah, OKRs is a framework. Right. We once had a couple who came over and said that they use OKRs in their personal lives, right?
Wow,
in
their marriage. Wow.
In their marriage, because it's a framework. You can actually use it anywhere.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So companies both big and small can adopt it. The one checkpoint is as you get larger as an organization, because there's so much of legacy of practices and processes, change management becomes a lot more difficult. But agile startups are able to get to it very quickly, because you come on to OKRs right from the start.
Right.
So they're able to take teams through it. So I think change management to me is more in larger companies. There are companies which are very KPI driven who may not need OKRs.
Right.
So for instance, let's say, let's say BPOs or KPOs.
Correct.
Right? And where it's very, very KPI driven, may not need OKRs, but it may be for one part of the organization.
Got it.
So that's broadly what we see.
And sometimes OKRs are also confused with special initiatives. We'll do a drive to, let's say, to improve our company culture or something. So we'll make it. So do you caution against something like that? Or
the litmus test there is, hey, what's the company's strategy? Where are the growth levers? And if it aligns with, let's say the drive aligns to that,
then yes.
Yeah, then yes. Because there may be certain companies which are in this segment of doing good, and maybe the drive would align to it.
Right.
But if it's not, then go back to the drawing board and see whether that's actually an OKR or not.
So Vidya, enough ink has been spilled on why OKRs work. Okay, let's spend some time on why they don't. I mean, you manage 50,000 OKRs, right? So I'm sure not all of them have, all those companies have found it to be successful. So can you walk us through what can fail? Why do they fail? Let's assume we have the sponsor champion and all of that. Uske baad, why do they fail?
Yeah. So there's always this nemesis, right? Why do OKRs? It's hard, right? OKRs are hard. It's not easy because there's just think about it. In a quarter, there are 12 chances for people to correct their strategy execution,
Right.
And that requires rigor. So it feels when the rigor stops. So let's say you do it for, let's say, a few weeks and they're like, oh, it's just too hard and it's like going to the gym and we want to stop. We have a coach, but we don't want to take it further. Then it fails. So when the internal rigor stops. The second reason is something that I've seen very, very closely is that when sponsors start reviewing metrics which are other than OKRs, considering revenue being one of the topmost metrics which everybody wants to run after. So if I'm only reviewing the lag metrics as a sponsor and I'm not reviewing any of the lead indicators, because OKRs are all about lead indicators,
Right.
and again it starts crumbling. Third is we're not celebrating enough because one of the reasons what we also see is that even small feat are big feat in OKRs. So small wins and achievement, if they're not celebrated during the course of the quarter, teams give up sometimes because it's hard, to achieve the lag metrics. So these are some of the reasons that we've seen.
Got it. What's the role of HR? How often do you find the sponsor or the champion being an HR leader?
Again, a very pertinent question. We often do not find HR as the sponsor. It's probably somebody who's, as I mentioned, one of the C-suite roles in business. And I think the reason being is that because it flows from strategy, it's very, very few metrics which are being taken by, and not by everybody in the company, but maybe few teams in the company. So let's say you have a 3,000 member company, maybe 300 of them would be on OKRs. It's not the entire organization. That's probably also a reason why HR leaders don't sponsor OKRs. However, HR leaders actually set up a huge environment to embrace OKRs because that linkage to people practices like recognition, feedback, right? If you just pull away reviews and ratings, but some of these softer elements, if you inculcate OKRs as a rhythm in it, then it makes a big difference. OKRs are, HR leaders are great ambassadors as well. They're cheerleaders of OKRs, and there we've seen that it sustains. And of course, where they're a little distant from it.
So do they play a more effective role in connecting the individual employees to this system and in educating and
that's right.
becoming a kind of a evangelist?
They do. And where they connect the dots between individuals is where they have a clear intent that will make a difference to, let's say, the company performance. So they understand outcome metrics. They understand that teams are coming together. They understand they're part of cross-functional teams.
Right.
And I think that's where it makes a difference. And when HR leaders have that mindset, it's mind-blowing actually.
So in conclusion, Vidya, like if a company is already using the OKR system or has tried it but hasn't worked or is thinking about it, what are a few things that you would like to leave our audience with in terms of this whole framework? What are a few things that they should always keep in mind, whether they're already using it, have used it and want to go back, or they're just wanting to try it for the first time?
60% of OKR rollouts fail.
Okay,
so
thank you.
You can actually think about whether you want to get onto it or not.
Okay.
But once you're onto it and you're committed to it, the results are, of course, the outcomes will come through because everybody's got a outcome mindset now. They're not thinking tasks, they're thinking outcomes. So having said that, if you've tried OKRs and you've failed, try again.
Okay.
Try it with the right rituals. If you're just about setting onto OKRs, go back to the question, Srini, that you asked, which is every company ready for OKRs?
Right.
Look above the iceberg and below the iceberg. Companies are not ready.
Like, is this really for us?
It's really for us. Go back to KPIs, and that's fine. That's the choice. To your third question, if they have tried, probably partially got it right, give it another quarter, right? And don't give up, because if you give up, it's extremely difficult to get the person back on the saddle.
Back on track.
Right? And
because you become a skeptic then.
You become a skeptic.
Right.
Yeah. So I think I would probably leave it with this advice.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Vidya, for being on Close the Loop. I think I've learned more about OKRs speaking to you for 20 minutes than I have going through all the trainings that I have. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Srini, and wonderful to be here. Thank you.